And Charlie, you have something to say?
Yes, given the hour, we're going to try to be as efficient with our time as we can at this point. In the public testimony, we have not heard any new issues that were not raised in the comment letters that we received. We have provided you with documentation of our responses to those comments. In the staff report, there's summary response to all of the comment letters that were received except the ones from eBase and Shoot Mahali. LSA has provided you with a written response to the eBase and Shoot Mahali letter, and you have that before you as well. The things that you do not have in writing are responses to comments concerning air quality, noise, and traffic. We would like to ask LSA and Fair and Peers to briefly summarize their responses in those areas. We will have written responses in those areas in time for City Council consideration of this item, but at this point we'd like to ask them to make a brief presentation on the responses in those areas and then answer any questions that you may have.
Okay.
All right. So, Lynette Diaz? And Carol would like to say something else also.
Commissioners, I would just before Lynette speaks, I'd like to identify for the record that we did receive 2 comments that were submitted past the public comment period, and one was from it was from the State Clearinghouse, but the underlying letter was actually from the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the other letter was submitted on April 22nd from the Emeryville Transportation Management Association. And CEQA does not require a response to comments received after the public comment period is closed, but we'd like to point out a couple of issues raised in the letter. With regard to the Regional Quality Control Board, their concern was basically that there are new, more stringent standards under our discharge permit and coming online, and that the city comply with that, and that Pixar comply with those new standards. Our city ordinance requires that requires that any construction of a certain size within the city, and Pixar would come within it, that they comply with the NPDES permit. I will point out that the new requirements will not apply to construction where the application was deemed complete prior to February 5th, 2005. So the more stringent standards would not apply to the Phase 2 building, although our current standards are fairly compatible with what's coming online, so it's doubtful that there'd be any difference. But with the next 2 phases, definitely whatever's in place at that time, Pixar will have to comply with those standards. The Emeryville Transportation Management Association's letter basically wrote to say that they're in support of the project. They expressed some concern with increased traffic and suggested that Pixar be involved in an employee trip reduction program, or that a trip reduction program be required of Pixar. And I think that what we heard from Pixar is that they do have one in place at this time, and I will also note that our conditions of approval also require a trip reduction program be implemented. So.
Carol. Lynette.
Okay, I'll do this really briefly. As Charlie, actually, Commissioner Martin, I'll first address your comment regarding, or question regarding the pile driving that was recommended in the analysis done by Dr. Fox. And I did review, as we discussed earlier, the noise impacts associated with construction are not considered significant in the city of Emeryville. And looking at those measures, I have to say I am not personally familiar enough with them to say, you know, how effective they would be, and if they're appropriate for this type of project and this site. Those types of pile drivers are, it does even indicate in the letter that they're only suitable for certain types of soil conditions. So I can't say. We talked, one possibility the city may want to consider is even though that's not a significant impact under CEQA, if they wanted to be more conservative, you can consider something like that as a condition of approval. I'm not sure how feasible that is. It's something we could maybe craft the wording of the mitigation to, of the condition of approval to allow for some flexibility depending upon some further information that I could provide the city at a later date.
And my main point in asking Lynette that question was the suggestion of using a pile driver that has an enclosure on it. So when the strike comes down on that pier, the noise is attenuated, and there's a reference that the attenuation can be as much as 20 dBA. And knowing what we've all heard and listened to over the years with pile driving, I'm just wondering if this type of pile driver is available, and can we use it to address the repetitive noise?
Right.
Understanding that it is short-term and your conclusions with regard to significance.
And I'm not personally familiar with it enough to say,
That type of pile driver?
to say it is here tonight. So then I'll just spin, as Charlie mentioned, we did provide written responses to the majority of the comments in the e-base letter and the Shoot-Mahaly and Weinberger letter, with exception of 3 areas in the Shoot-Mahaly letter, which included the air quality and noise comments, which were provided in a separate attachment. That was the analysis for air and noise was prepared by Dr. Phyllis Fox. And her comments I have categorized into 3 very broad topics. One, the first related to construction period air quality impacts. We've talked about that some in my earlier presentation, but essentially that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District CEQA guidelines do not identify construction period impacts as significant as long as their guidelines for site dust control are implemented, and they detail both enhanced and basic measures. We've recommended implementation of both of those, and their analysis compares to the threshold, a threshold that's not appropriately compared to construction period impacts. It's one that is for mobile source emissions. So on our conclusion relative to their comments on the construction period impacts, is that they will not be significant and additional mitigation measure is not warranted based on the additional analysis that they've provided. They also raised concerns about public health impacts, and we do not believe that these are appropriate to address related to construction, as the current method of determining health risks of this type consider only long-term exposure of 70 years for residents. And so when you look at construction in that time frame, the effect is so minimal it's not really even measurable. They also raised concerns about diesel exhaust. Diesel exhaust does not have a recognized acute health risk at this time, and so there's not a threshold to compare it against. The second broad topic that I'll talk about is construction noise. There was a lot of detailed analysis in their letter pertaining to that. Again, that is an area where the city does not, based on the significance threshold that they use and they've used on other projects, does not consider significant. And then finally...
May I pose a question to staff? There's one recommendation in the mitigation that Dr. Fox identified that I would think could be something that could be easily accommodated by the city, and that's identifying, notifying people of where they could contact, a name and a phone number of an individual with the city or somebody out on the job site where they could contact if there are problems with noise.
Well, that's a standard condition.
Is that
of
included in
approval.
the standard? Okay.
I believe we have it in these conditions. If we didn't, we should have. But we require all...
I didn't remember seeing it, but I looked at a lot of stuff today.
the Planning Commission always makes sure those signs go up, and I get calls if they're not.
Because I think that's really important, and that's something that I don't see as an egregious request.
It is in the condition.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Then finally, they had comments relative to both operational period, noise and air quality impacts, as well as, boy, at this late hour I can't talk, cumulative impacts associated with the operational period. We did carefully consider the additional information that they provided and the additional analysis they provided, looked carefully at the analysis that we have done as well. We concluded that the analysis provided in the initial study is defensible. It provides the same level of analysis that actually would be provided in an EIR, as well as the traffic analysis does as well. If the city was to choose the direction of an EIR, then the level of analysis that we did is the same. And the findings would be the same in an EIR as well, based on the analysis that we conducted. And for those topics, an EIR does not require additional analysis. A more detailed written response will be provided to the City Council on each individual comment received relative to that. If you have additional questions, I'm happy to answer them. And Rob Reese with Fair and Peers will summarize the comments received and responses for the traffic-related items.
Thank you. Any questions for Lynette? No. Thank you, Lynette. Rob?
I'm Rob Reese with Fair and Pierce and Associates, and we were the traffic engineering firm responsible for the traffic analysis in the mitigated negative deck. My comments will pertain to Tom Berhard's letter. He's a traffic engineer that was retained by Robert Perlmutter. I apologize if I got that wrong. To peer review our work, and so I'll address his comments. But first, I wanted to address the Commission's issue regarding the bulb outs at Watt and Park Avenue. The intent of the bulb outs is twofold. One, its primary purpose is to reduce the walking distance for pedestrians as they cross Park Avenue. Right now, pedestrian has to walk out into the parking lane, then walk through the travel lanes where the cars drive up and down the road, and then walk through another parking lane to cross the street. What the bulb outs or curb extensions would do is that they would protect, in a sense, they would protect the parking. So they would come out as far as a parked car would. And so the pedestrian then can walk out on the curb to that location at the end of the parking. They can more easily see down the corridor, and then when they walk across the street, it's a shorter distance walking-wise. There's a number of ways in which to construct the curb extensions or bulb outs that can cause traffic congestion by not allowing cars to drive around other cars that are waiting to make turns. But you can also modify those designs so that cars can bypass somebody that's trying to turn left or right at the intersection. And what I'd like to do is just to illustrate that at the council meeting, I'll bring some different alternatives of how the curb extensions could look from a design perspective. And then we can talk and have a discussion about the traffic flow through the intersection. With regards to the peer review comments, I guess in general I would just say there's sprinkled throughout the comments or the questions are references to our 1998 traffic study. And I just wanted to make it clear that the 1998 traffic study was completed prior to any Pixar development being here. And as such, we had to base our analysis off of theoretical data, published data, generic data that is based on industry nationwide average traffic rates, for example. The study that we completed for this project is based on traffic data that we collected in 2003, last year. And so the basis for this study is based on traffic conditions that exist at this time, not traffic conditions that occurred back in 1998. We also have the luxury of having a project here, Pixar, that is in operation, that has a substantial number of employees, and so we're able to survey the site to identify what its specific traffic characteristics are like, which is a substantial benefit to us. If we were to use industry rates, for example, like the headquarters, that is land use that's in the ITE trip generation, that headquarters, those 18, those 20 studies that represent the trips in that report could be a Chevron headquarters, it could be an Intel headquarters, it could be the bakery headquarters if they had multiple stores throughout the area. It's generic. We had the opportunity to use actual data that we observed in the field, and that brings it to a higher level of standard than using generic average rates. With respect to some of the other issues, I'll just go through them very quickly. The peak hour trip generation rates that we did use, the peer reviewer indicated that we should have adjusted the rates to take into account the actual number of employees on the site at the time that we did the survey. This is not ITE practice, it's not industry practice. What you look at is a typical day, and during a typical day you have people that are sick, you have people on vacation, you have people that leave the site to go to meetings, and you have people that are invited to the site to go to meetings. And so what you want in a traffic analysis is a typical day. Our study period that we looked at in October and then did some reassessment in April and May, those are time periods when there are not vacations generally. They're not right around holiday periods, and therefore they reflect what we believe to be as typical days. With respect to the number of Pixar employees potentially being underestimated, this is actually a good representation of a development like Pixar that has unique characteristics to it, that has collaborative work areas, that has areas with a lot of high-tech equipment and very few employees, and multiple meeting rooms and other activity areas. The consultant identifies square foot per employee ratios, and those range from 349 square feet per employee with phase 1 upwards to 382 square feet per employee with phase 1 and 2 combined. Typical office uses, typical headquarters like a Chevron or an Intel or some of those large firms have employee ratios of 250 to 300 square feet per employee. That represents about a 20 to 50% higher intensity than what Pixar is generating. And so that goes to show the uniqueness of Pixar compared to a lot of generic businesses and headquarters. With respect to the trip generation data not meeting ITE practice, there is no, the trip generation data is significantly lower than accepted ITE practices. The statement is a little bit confusing because there is no accepted practice for determining a minimum peak hour trip generation rate or a maximum peak hour trip generation rate. So I'm not clear as to what he intends there. However, he does say later on in the paragraph that it is acceptable to use specific data as a way of determining trip generation. Let's see. Just trying to hit the highlights. The peer reviewer goes on to make comparison between the rates that we used in this study and the rates that we used in 1998 study, and I just want to reiterate that this was based on an actual operating Pixar facility whereas 1998 was generic and theoretical. He makes a comment that our capacity calculations contain errors, and he uses an example of the intersection delay being 11 seconds without the project, and then it increases, or 12 seconds without the project, and then it decreases to 11 seconds. And he makes a statement, something to the effect that this just is not possible if you add traffic to an intersection. But it is possible. If the approach that you're adding traffic to has a delay of 5 seconds for each vehicle that goes through that approach, and your average delay for all the vehicles is 11 seconds, then if you add more vehicles to that approach that has 5 seconds of delay, by default, your average delay for the intersection as a whole decreases. If you add the traffic to an approach that has more delay, then your delay would increase. And so when he refers to this location, what he's failing to understand is that the traffic is being added to an approach that is operating very well, much better than the average. The next issue that I think is important to highlight is the 2025 traffic volumes on San Pablo Avenue. In this section, he's referring to the Alameda County Congestion Management Agency analysis that we conducted. And I just want to make it very clear that that analysis is actually it's a regional-based network. It does not include all of the roads in Emeryville. For example, one of the traffic analysis zones in that model covers Hollis Street, 45th Street, the railroad tracks, and Powell. That is considered one zone and therefore has one or two connections to the surrounding road system. Likewise, the model does not include roads like 53rd Street or 45th Street. Because they are not considered regionally significant. The second issue is that the CMA model is a broad-based model, and it is I would say it's a bureaucratic requirement. The CMA requires you to do this analysis their way. And what they mean by their way is that the model is given to you. The model was already run by somebody else. We are not allowed to change the model. We have to simply take the numbers out of the model that they give us and put them on the paper in the table and then say whether there's an impact. So we don't have the ability to look at how the model assigns traffic, for example, in that very large zone to make sure that it's being assigned to the roadway system properly. So the model, it's a requirement, it's a bureaucratic requirement, but it does not have anything to do with the actual traffic operations that exist out there today or that exist out there in 2025. Then there's a couple of issues regarding the Park Avenue access mitigation. He goes on to identify, he states that let me just paraphrase this. The Park Avenue access, I identified stop sign installation as a technique for trying to both balance the delay at the intersection for all cars, but more importantly, to give a better balance between pedestrians and vehicles. Warrants for a stop sign are guidelines only. They are not direction, they are guidelines. And so I believe the installation of a stop sign is necessary in order to balance pedestrian and vehicle activity. It is not a warrant, it is my professional opinion. He has a different he thinks differently. The mid-block bicycle crossing that he identifies, there is no mid-block bicycle crossing. There is a Class 1 bicycle facility that starts at Park Avenue and continues to 45th Street. If you're a pedestrian on that facility, you are connected to the sidewalk system on Park Avenue or 45th Street. If you are a bicyclist, you have a stop sign at the end of that path. You stop, you look at the traffic flow on Park Avenue, and you proceed into or onto Park Avenue as a motor vehicle. Bicycles are motor vehicles. They are not allowed to use crosswalks, and they are intended to be bicycles. They are intended to be vehicles. That is how they're defined in the California Vehicle Code. And so we do not allow, or we do not want to have mid-block striped crosswalks. We have a stop sign, and the bicyclist stops and waits for a gap in vehicle traffic and then proceeds and operates as if they're a vehicle. There's reference made to the bicycle boulevard and the idea that because it's become a bicycle boulevard, we'll have traffic redistributed throughout the area. There's only 3,900 cars using 45th Street in a typical day. That is representative of a local corridor. So you won't have traffic diversion because the corridor is not being used as a through route. It's being used as a local access to the area businesses along the corridor. With respect to the sharp reverse curve, the consultant identifies a design speed of 40 kilometers per hour. That represents 25 miles per hour. So what he is saying is that a bicycle path that is a multi-use trail for bikes and pedestrians needs to be designed for a bicyclist traveling 25 miles per hour. I don't know where he gets that information. The information that our firm uses when we look at bicycle paths and designing bicycle systems is a 15 mile per hour design speed. And that has never been contested. If there's an issue with speeding bicyclists on a bike path, then you can install speed limit signs which the bicyclists are required to follow. With regards to the access gate, I think that our mitigation for this is actually quite strong, counter to what the consultant says. We have said that if there's any congestion on the public street as a result of their entry gate operation and the city deems it to be unacceptable, the city can force Pixar to open up their gates and allow free flow in. If you allow free flow in, that gets you 600 to 800 cars in a peak hour, which is more than sufficient to cover the amount of traffic coming into the Pixar site. However, we have a fallback. If that does not work, then Pixar would be required by the city to open up the gate on 45th Street during particularly busy times. I think this is a very good mitigation because it gives several levels of opportunity for the city to interject their views and force Pixar to do what's right for the public street system. They have that ability now, by the way, but they have chosen not to activate it. Let's see. You've heard about the opportunities that they have with the public transit in the business development district or business improvement district. The last item that I think is of importance for tonight is the 45th Street at Hollis Street traffic signal. We assume that it would be put in place. The city of Emeryville can go and install that traffic signal tomorrow. Therefore, we assume that it was in place and operational under all future scenarios with or without the project. And that is the end of my hopefully brief summary. And I will have written comments later. That's it.
Thanks, Rob. Are there questions of Rob?
One question regarding parking. I noticed in the PDP they talked about the phasing, and Tom gave a little presentation on when the parking structure might come in. And he's identified that this wasn't adequately addressed in the initial study. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot that one. We identified the impact that there will be insufficient parking on site if Pixar builds a parking structure on the existing surface parking lot without providing replacement parking. We've also said that if they use the surface parking for construction staging, that also would be a parking impact that Pixar would have to mitigate. The peer reviewer is indicating that we should identify what that specific mitigation is now by identifying what off-site space, what off-site parking areas are available, and how they might do van pooling or other types of measures. That's not for us to decide. It's for us to decide. It's for us to say that you're going to have a parking impact if you build this parking garage on the surface parking lot without providing alternatives for that parking. It's up to Pixar to decide how they are going to deal with that issue. They could, for all we know, close up for a year while they build the parking garage and just not have anybody come to work. That's their decision, not my decision and not your decision. This same issue happened with the IKEA store when they put in the parking structure there. IKEA needed to find additional parking, and rather than trying to force the parking on site, they obtained agreements with the old Kmart site, which is now a Design Expo site. And they utilized that parking, which was underutilized, and then they had some shuttle service going back and forth, and they had some pedestrian connections. And it was used reasonably well, although there was congestion, since those patrons are infrequent visitors. So I don't know if that helped.
It did, thanks.
I actually have a suggested minor edit to that mitigation measure transportation 11 that I'd like the Commission to consider. It simply reinforces that parking requirements will be met at every phase of development. So if you look at the mitigation measure transportation 11, the last bullet states designate general use, site access, and general employee and visitor parking and circulation areas on site. We could then insert comma, required parking spaces for each phase of development, comma, and then continue, and any necessary off-site shuttle connections to serve designated off-site parking supplies during construction. And that, in my mind, that sort of captures the question that was raised in the comment. Although we all know they've got to meet their parking requirements at each phase, it reinforces that as part of this program.
I think that's a good clarification.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Are there any other questions other commissioners have, Rob? Because I do have one other suggestion. Yeah. I raised, when Lynette was presenting to us, I raised a question and concern about the bulb outs at the existing entrance and what that does to querying on Park Avenue. I know it's already an existing problem, especially during special events, that Pixar is, I imagine, trying to address. I'm just referring to mitigation measure transportation 4 on page 6 of the initial study. Physically, what happens is the bulb outs will prevent the eastbound Park Avenue vehicles from moving around those left-turning vehicles into the access. And what I'd like to suggest in revising this mitigation measure is to simply insert the mitigation measure reads, the project applicant shall redesign the crossing to provide curb extensions at the northwest corner of the Park Avenue / Watt Street / Pixar driveway intersection and relocate the crosswalk accordingly. There's a reference to a figure there. In my mind, this is the first phase. If we get the bulb out on the north side of the street, it still allows for querying on the eastbound travel. We'll have stop signs at that intersection, which I think provide improved pedestrian crossing safety, and we can see how that functions during the first phase and sort of resolves the questions that are raised, not just in this mitigation measure, but in a couple other mitigation measures. Does that make sense to the Commission? Under mitigation measure transportation 6, I assume it was your engineering standard that's recommended for this relates to the pedestrian path on the east side of the development that Pixar is going to be building, and the Class 2 bicycle lane there. There's a standard of a 10-foot wide paved path and 2-foot graded area on either side. the original application had a 6-foot wide path with 2-foot shoulders. And in my mind, given the use and the importance of that 40-foot wide corridor, not just for the bicycle link, but for the screening of the Pixar development, I would prefer to see a maximum 10-foot wide solution, whether it's 6-foot with 2-foot aggregate shoulders or 10-foot paved surface. 10 feet, in my mind, is more than adequate to allow for maneuvering of pedestrians and bicycles on that pathway, and it will give us 4 more feet of potential landscape area.
Yeah, one issue for the commission to consider is that in order to call it a Class 1 multi-use trail, the minimum paved width needs to be 8 feet. If the minimum paved width is not 8 feet, then you cannot call it a multi-use trail. And combined with that 8 feet, you need to have the 2-foot aggregate shoulders on either side.
As part
also.
of that
Yes.
designated standard.
If you want to call it a multi-use path, yes, you do. Otherwise, it's a pedestrian
I think
way.
for the idea of a bike plan and something that connects to other segments of the plan, it's important to maintain a designation. I'd at least like to get the 2 feet out of that path. If we're allowed to go down to 8 feet of pavement and 2 feet shoulder, we get 2 more feet of landscape area along that buffer. And if the commission's agreeable to that, I'd like to see that planning area.
You want my opinion?
Yeah.
My opinion is that wider is better. We prefer the 10-foot path, especially if it's going to have both bicycles and pedestrians using it. On the Greenway, north of Ocean, I don't recall what the exact widths are, but that has a separate bike path and pedestrian path side by side. At this location, we don't have that luxury. We just have one path with both pedestrians and cyclists using it. And my opinion is that the volume of use that we hope this will get would dictate that we think it should be a minimum of 10-foot paved. And, I don't know that if you reduced it to 8 feet, you'd actually pick up 1 foot of landscaping on either side of it. You will have, let's say, 10 feet in a 40-foot right-of-way. You will have 15 feet of landscaping. Well, no, you'll have, with the shoulder, you'll have 13 feet of landscaping on either side. And I don't know, in my view, that's sufficient. I'd like to remind you that
Looking for every foot, Charlie.
originally, Tom, in his presentation, alluded to the fact that in our discussions, the parkway got wider. That was something that we pushed hard for. Originally, the design was to have 20 feet total behind lawns with a 6-foot path and 2-foot shoulders, which would have left you, 6 feet on either side, I guess, for landscaping? So now we have 10-foot path, 2-foot shoulders, and 13 feet on either side for landscaping, which we think is a big improvement.
I'm much for the safety factor because I've shared bike paths with the pedestrian, and sometimes you need that extra space.
I guess, before I let the issue go, in addition to the 10 feet, we have 2 feet of stabilized treatment on either side of that path. My concern there is that we have a garage, eventually we'll have a garage that may be 70 feet tall. And, I'd just like to see as much potential growing area there as possible. I realize it's a balance, but
I do want to point out one thing about the mitigation measures related to the garage. I think it would be interesting if this massing model were redone to show that. But see the existing building in the middle of that massing model and the height of that existing building. Well, if you carry that across to the garage, anything above the height of that existing building will be stepped back at a 45-degree angle. So that hopefully the height of the garage will appear, as you're standing next to it at any rate, to be no taller than the existing building. and then the upper levels will be stepped back above that. So you'd have like a cornice or something around at the level of the existing
No, I
building, and
understand.
the upper floors would sort of disappear, hopefully, unless you stood way back. So when you're standing on the bike path next to it, it won't appear to be as tall.
Yeah,
as-
my
as it
concern is really views from San Pablo Avenue and the Long's parking lot and Copacabana and the
Well, there will be
plazas there.
trees. There will be
Trying to
trees
screen that.
And actually, that is also in the mitigation measure, that there be adequate screening of all around the garage, on all sides.
Yeah. That, again, that assumes you've got the planning area to achieve that. I think the only other transportation-related comment that I had was in comparing mitigation measure transportation 8 and mitigation measure transportation 9, transportation 8 goes back to the querying and access and congestion on Park Avenue, and transportation measure 9 reserves use of 45th Street specifically. And I'm just wondering if we should have some reference back to transportation number 8 in transportation 9, because that allows, if there is a problem, the city to address that. The tone of mitigation measure transportation 9 seems to imply an exclusive right of Pixar to make the decision, and I would suggest at the end of the first sentence we simply insert after the word only, except as called for in mitigation measure transportation 8, to clarify that interrelationship between the two measures. I'm not sure how the commission feels about that. I just want to make sure the two measures are consistent. When you actually read them, there's a question.
One last question, comment, sorry. And this is a follow-up to one of the speakers' concerns about adequate loading on 45th. In your review of the PDP, have you determined that there would be adequate truck loading so that there wouldn't be conflicts on 45th?
What we believe is that the loading issues on 45th, the double parking and the like, that is an enforcement issue, and so the Emeryville PD can go out at any time and cite anybody that's double parking. So that, to me, is the resolution to any loading problems that either occur now or will occur in the future.
But is there adequate on-site loading areas?
Well, when we were out there observing the corridor, we did not observe Pixar trucks double parked. We did observe double parking for trucks that were going to the building on the north side of 45th Street. That's what we observed, and we saw that as an enforcement issue.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions for Rob? Thanks, Rob.
Thanks.
Now it's really in our lap to deliberate and come to some decisions on where to take this application. I realize it's late, but I want to make sure we have an opportunity to fully discuss what we've heard tonight, because there are important things to consider. I'm not sure who'd like to start.
I'll
Joe,
start.
would you like to start?
I'll give it. I have lots of comments, but because of the lateness, you guys get lucky. I have 3 areas I want to talk about: traffic, the CEQA process, and then the jobs things brought up by eBase. The first one is traffic. I've always had the best mitigation for traffic, and I've proposed it several times. Nobody takes me up on it. Charge the Berkeley and Oakland residents that use Emeryville for a thoroughfare to San Francisco $5 a car. All right? That's probably going to help out a lot, but obviously that's not going to happen. And if I recall correctly, I think Emeryville is the only city around that has a free shuttle to help, and I think Pixar pays for part of that, don't you? Anyway, traffic, what's going to happen here, and is what people don't know, is that as we went through the planning process, if we didn't do any projects from 1992, when we first started the Catellus site, we would have F-rated intersections all the way throughout the city. A lot of the projects that we brought on, particularly Catellus, gave us the 40th Street, the bridge, the punch-through, all of these things, and we've had a lot of mitigations as these projects have come on. So we've actually improved our traffic in this city. It's just that 90% of it isn't ours, is going somewhere else. So traffic, we're going to have traffic. It's something we're going to have to live with. We live in an urban area that is growing and growing and growing. So we're trying our best to make the mitigations, to have the as Pixar is doing, which I really do want to get a picture of that transportation plan you have. We're trying our best to do that. As far as the secret process is and what we do as a commission, Chris, myself, and Paul have almost 50 years of service on the Planning Commission. I personally have been a resident of Emeryville for 30 years and have been involved in my community or the city for almost all that time, and so have most of these other people on the commission. So we take our responsibility to the city very, very seriously, far more seriously than most people even can believe. And we've gone through some very, very hard times. In 1992, in late 91 and 92, before I got on the commission, I started something called the SOX Committee, Save Our City Services. This is when Emeryville had no budget. We're a small city. We don't have a large tax base. And we were in jeopardy of losing some of our police and fire, which happened to be union workers. I went out there, formed a committee, and I was actually ready to bake, and that's scary. Bake bread to raise money for these people. Okay, so we do support jobs, and it may not be in the individual area that you want to do. But as far as the secret process goes, after that particular situation, and that was resolved, thank goodness, I got on the Planning Commission, and we started with Catellus. And we were just a new city, and we were learning the process, and we got pilloried, and we got requests for handouts and demands and agendas from everybody. They came out of the woodwork. We didn't know what we were doing. We learned. And by the time we went through Harcross, the plating plant, Westinghouse, the Bayfront, Del Monte, and hundreds of developments, and many of them very large toxic sites where we had major toxic areas to deal with, we ended up, I believe, having a Nobel Peace Prize for dealing with these issues. So we know what we're doing. We hire the good staff, we hire the right consultants, and we try our best in this city to protect our citizens. And that's where I'm going to come to the jobs. I read, we have BOSS, we have the Central Labor Council of Alameda, and then we have eBase. And the focus of all of those people has been jobs and job training. Well, what you're not seeing here is that as a commission for the entire city, we have things to look at that may be even more important, such as the biggest thing is the health and safety of our citizens. That means police and fire, medical services, and the elimination of toxic waste that we have in this city. These are very important health issues. The other things we want to control crime. We want to eliminate attractive nuisances. Then there are lower level things such as affordable housing, parks, education, the arts and culture, the transportation, including Emery-go-round. So there are a tremendous number of needs that we have to address. Part of them is jobs. And one of the things that happens is, let's take Pixar. They're going to give us some money for the general fund. Now that general fund, or they may be allocated actually for public safety, now that goes to our police and fire. Well, we actually have a wonderful police and fire department. And why is that? Because we have a desirable community and we have training. Some of that money that we have trains people to be better fire and better police. So we already have a training budget in here. So it's not just enough to say, well, you should put money here. Well, if you put money here, where do we take it from? Fire and police? Education? No. There's allocations that we have to make, and there is a plan, believe it or not, that we look to really bring the city up to where it is. When I moved here, and I was working in San Francisco, I told them I lived in Emeryville, and I got laughed at. I got laughed at. Now people want to move here from San Francisco. So we've done a good job. We're trying, and there has never been, in my 12 years here, and maybe Chris's 20 years here, a perfect project. There's not ever a project before us that gave us everything we wanted. And we had to arm wrestle Tom a little bit, but he's been pretty good with us. So we're very happy. We know that we're going to have quality jobs. We know that we're building our housing. We know that we do have affordable housing limits that we do deal with, and we hope that some of those people will move in and work for our businesses here. So we have a plan in place, and we're trying to execute it. And I know that what you're going after, and I agree with a lot of what you say, but demands are not the way we go about it. Requests and working with the community, that's a different story. So I support the project. I think we're doing a good job here, and I will back this our CEQA process to the hilt, because we've done it many, many times, and we know what we're doing.
I'd
Thanks,
like to
Joe.
kind of jump in on that because he's saying
Jump
a
in,
lot.
Chris.
Okay. We have to just kind of look at some real basic stuff here. We live in a state that has lost a whole lot of businesses over the last few years because of the fact that we have high taxes in California, high workers' compensation insurance, expensive real estate, environmental requirements, and there has been a lure by other states offering incredible incentives for our businesses to leave because they can do it cheaper in another state. My company's headquarters, which has been in California since its inception, moved to Florida in November because it's cheaper for them to do business there. So all of this trickles down into the cities. Figures. I know, I do it all the time, I set it off. So all of this trickles down into the cities, and the cities are having the same problem with not having any money. So anytime the city gets an opportunity to get a desirable business, then it's got to do whatever it can to hang on to it. And Pixar is the kind of company that every city would salivate to have in its town. They make movies, they do family entertainment. There is nothing about what they do for a living that's objectionable. It's all wonderful, it's charming, it's terrific. We're becoming world-renowned because we have them in town. And even though we get all these good things from them, we still say to them, okay, we're going to let you do this, but we want you to give us money. We want you to give us $1.5 million for this. We want you to give us real estate taxes. And we ask them for all these things, which they give us because they're good citizens. But see, we're in a redevelopment area here. And these tax revenues that we get, it's $3 million a year, is bondable for us over 25-year bonds to get redevelopment funds for housing. And all of these funds that are coming into us from them over the years will be used by the city because we will now have a healthy budget so we can do things for our community. We can have lots of fire, lots of police, and lots of parks and do things. We have a child care center where kids can send their kids to for free. And we've done all these things, but it's not up to Pixar to provide you that. It's up to the city to do. Pixar is doing their fair share. I mean, $5 million a year is a big chunk of our annual budget. So I just think, they are doing it. And as far as I'm concerned, we've just got to give them permission to grow here, and we should be enthusiastic about it and understand that it's a win-win for all of us. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Chris. Murray or Patty? Murray?
All right. I'm very sensitive to the work ethic. The comments that we heard about jobs and work touched me. I think that Pixar, working with our schools, working with the community, can post jobs that become available with their description first to Emeryville residents. I don't mean to impose a requirement, but certainly they can work with our organizations to provide that information. I'm all for Pixar. I'm all for the expansion, but I think within the expansion, they can or make some showing with the belief that there are jobs available. Maybe they won't be filled by Emeryville residents, but I think the effort should be there.
Thanks, Murray. Patty, you want to go?
Yeah. Just a few things here. In addressing some of the issues that were in the Shoot-Mahaly-Weinberg letter and the e-base letter, addressing some of the CEQA topics, I think that the LSA team has done a very good job of responding to those, and particularly with their responses this evening, because I did have a couple concerns about some of the traffic comments and noise comments that were submitted by the peer review consultants. But I think in terms of traffic and noise and air quality, for example, those issues have been more than adequately addressed, and a very comprehensive mitigation package has been put forward. Concerning the housing issue and concern about affordable housing, Emeryville is doing an outstanding job of providing housing, particularly the affordable housing component. One question I have of staff is, does HCD, when they are counting housing that's being put forward, do they count in their mix to meet goals the planning stage housing? Is that included in their mix in terms of what your goal is? Because that was sort of unclear to me. But it seems to me that the city is more than meeting those goals. But there was some discussion in the Shoot-Mahaly-Weinberg, for example, letter addressing a challenge about planned housing. And I just wanted to know, does HDC count that in towards of meeting your goal?
I believe it's based on the housing element of the general plan and what we have sites available for.
Okay.
Based on the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So to me, that indicates that you are meeting your goal. You've identified sites.
By far.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're ahead.
Okay, I think that needs to be made clear to the audience, because it's my opinion that we are meeting our goals, but there was some debate about that in some of these submittals. In terms of the bike route, I like the plan design for that bike route. I think the city is getting more than they're giving up. It's only shifting over about 50-odd feet, and I think that it's a bike route that really doesn't go anywhere per se, because it doesn't continue through past 45th Avenue. But this presents a great opportunity. If the Center for Community Living moves forward, we have a great access point for pedestrians coming from the south, for people at the promenade, for people at Pixar, that can utilize that bike path to access this new community center, which the city envisions this as something that will be supporting the community in many ways beyond providing educational facilities for our children. There'll be opportunities for health care, health education, job training, all of those things that many of the folks from eBase were identifying as concerns that they have, which are very important concerns, and I believe the city is in the process of addressing those. One area that I'm going to push you a little bit more on this one, Tom, is sort of dealing with the aesthetics and the public access. I think in terms of the design for the Phase 2 building, I think it's a great design. I love it. It captures that sort of warehouse block look in this part of the city in Park Avenue, and I like the way this design echoes that. And I love the glass portion of it that opens it up and reveals activity in the daytime and evening hours. I think it's wonderful. I'm not concerned about the overall mass and bulk of the structures. I think generally they are compatible with the surrounding area, and they are creating a continuous street edge, which is what you usually see in a historic district with the boxes. With the old block buildings. The parking structure is a little on the tall side, but with the step backs, I think that will address some of the concerns that people have about the visual impact of the building and the building mass. But I am still concerned about the sort of public access, people being able to have some sense of welcome. I know that the Pixar is doing so much with the community in terms of outreaching and providing all sorts of programs, but the fence is still it's a physical barrier and it's a psychological barrier, and the corner of Hollis and Park is a gateway location into the city, and I know you did a nice job of explaining why you didn't think that there could be some sort of focal point at that corner. But I'd really like to see something more that could be done in terms of maybe stepping it back or opening up the fence area, providing some sort of a community space that could be accessed at the ground level and still maintain your security. I think if there was a way to sort of open that up to the community a little bit, it would be outstanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. I actually have some suggestions about that. But I guess first, I think the issues of jobs and employment and displacement are important ones. And I appreciate that eBase has worked to educate some of the people who live in Emeryville. My concern is their approach, or my interpretation of their approach, has been an adversarial one. And this is a small town, and there's a litigious tone to the comments that we received, and in my mind, it's not certainly not one of a cooperative effort and the opportunity when you live in a small town, and the response that you get when you work with the council, and when you work with staff, and when you work with the business community. And we've seen the success, surprising to many, of Measure A and the monies that's providing the schools, and all the efforts that have gone into addressing the deficiencies in our school district. And to be critical of the approach and the comments that we've received, I think there is potential for alienation, and when you're in a small town, that doesn't serve anyone. And I would hope and encourage that eBase and everybody who is working with them and has their attention realize the opportunity here of working with people in a cooperative way. And I did see Tom shaking his head up and down during the evening as some of these issues and suggestions were raised. With regard to the community benefit agreement, in my mind, that's not something that's within the purview of the commission. Emeryville has never had a community benefit agreement. I see our charge as looking at the CEQA compliance, looking at general plan and zoning ordinance issues. That's a planning, in my mind, that's a planning commission responsibility. And even the suggestion of a community benefit agreement or something short of that possible entanglement is something that really has to be hammered out in policy with the council. And that's going to take a cooperative effort there. And I hope that eBase continues in their organizational capacity and their interest in helping educate people and working with the council and the business community to address some of their needs. Because I agree that there are some valid points there that have been raised. So that's sort of my criticism of one side that we've seen tonight. I also have a tendency to be very specific in my criticism as part of my responsibility, what I see as my responsibility as a commissioner. And I've raised some of those specific comments in looking at the mitigated negative declaration. And I have some others, even suggestions. Patty referred to a point that I raised earlier when Tom was making his presentation. We had a study session a year ago, and I think the commission raised a lot of good points, and we repeatedly expressed concern about the physical separation and what that fence does as an impression, and notwithstanding the security issue, I think there are ways that you can improve on the design and allow for an improved impression as you move down the streets that surround your complex. And I actually have some specific language that I would like considered for the preliminary development plan that I'll pass out to commissioners. And if you can pass one down to Charlie and one to Carol. I guess Deborah needs one too. I'm going to actually let Pixar take a look at this. I think I will start with, before we get into these PDP issues, we had one of the owners from Semi-Freddy's address the commission tonight, and I think the commission voiced a lot of concern about that phase of development and what it does to those businesses that we want to retain here. And I don't think it's necessary to have some specific standards, but I would like some acknowledgement on Pixar's part that they are willing to, and this is separate from what the language you're reading right now, Tom, but I would like some acknowledgement in the conditions of approval that, and I actually have some suggested language and a place to include that in condition of approval under Section 2A5. And I hope you'll listen to this with an open mind. But basically, I would like included in the condition of approval a statement that similar to the following: prior to approval of the FDP for the Hollis building portion of either Phase 3 or 4, Pixar shall demonstrate that they have worked cooperatively with the city and any remaining tenants of the Hollis building in an attempt to relocate and retain these businesses in Emeryville. I deliberately left that as an open arrangement, but I would like it recognized that Pixar is willing to do what it can to try to find a place, particularly for Semi-Freddy's. And I'm not sure how the rest of the commission feels about that language, but I certainly want it considered. I think what I'll do is just go through my points and then ask how the commission feels and whether we can get a consensus on
Why
those.
don't we just deal with them one at a time, right?
Okay.
Okay. We got Semi-Freddy's as the only tenant left in there, basically, right?
Is Bisco's gone?
Bisco's has asked to be released from their lease early,
Okay,
and we have given them that. So we are helping them.
great.
I think that's a demonstration right there.
Right. And Semi-Freddy's has what? What did he say? Another 6 or 7 years?
7 years.
And he is,
We'll honor their lease.
right. And the
Well,
only,
I don't think that language is
and that
necessary.
gives, I don't think so either, because he's already acknowledged that they were a good landlord. And I don't think in this free country we want to enforce them that they've got to find them another place in Emeryville. It will be up to Semi-Freddy's to find a replacement, and they have 7 years to do so. And I'm sure every real estate broker in the Bay Area is looking for a
And I
place for
think-
them already.
I think Tom would agree that if he can help, if he can find something, I don't want to put it on him, but I'm sure Tom would want Semi-Freddy's to stay in Emeryville also, right?
Speak up a little bit, you're starting to fade.
I'm sorry. Tom, is that correct? You would like them to stay? So I don't think we need any language. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
When you-
Patty
I
or
guess one
Murray?
question that I have is, and I don't want to impose a burden on the city either, but, I would imagine that our excellent staff, such as Patrick O'Keefe, will be working with Semi-Freddy's and others to the extent that they can work with them to help them. So I think that whatever we can do as a city to assist Semi-Freddy's, because they are great business, they're great for the community, they have a lot of good, well-paying jobs, and whatever we could do to help them stay in town would be ideal. Maybe it can be some sort of language that the city and Semi-Freddy and Pixar work cooperatively together to assist them in their relocation.
I volunteer Jim
To do what?
to find Semi-Freddy's a place.
I suggested Atlas.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
I-
true.
I thought that was a great place.
My point is we've worked very hard, the council in particular, and Patrick has worked very hard to pull in businesses, especially in the promenade. And we've done that work. I just don't want, at the same time, on the other side of the Pixar's development, to lose Semi-Freddy's.
I am
And-
sure Patrick's on it.
And like I said, I'm
went
also
home.
sure that Tom is going to do, if Tom comes up with an opportunity someplace, he's going to give it to Semi-Freddy's. So I think,
And the point is Semi-Freddy's knows that they've got 7 more years, but that they've got to leave sometime within that time period. So that gives them a lot of time to look for it. And I am sure that it's on the high priority list of Patrick O'Keefe's, our Redevelopment Agency Director, to find them another place here in Emeryville.
I hope so. Murray, is that an issue to you? I guess my
Not
point...
an issue to me.
Okay. So we've got a majority there. The second sort of point that I had raised with regard to mitigation measure noise, one was with regard to pile driving, the options there. Your employees are going to be the most affected, so I'm trusting that you will do what you can to explore those options to attenuate that noise, and I'm sure you'll do that. So I'm not concerned about revising language there.
Oh, okay. I was ready to support that one.
Yeah. Oh, were you? I think Tom will do that automatically. before we get into that, there was one other improvement that I'd like to suggest to mitigation measure AES-1 on page 2. And this goes to the design issues and trying to set some standards for the future phases that we haven't seen and don't have a lot of control over right now. And fortunately, we'll be able to review and make some recommendations on the FDP. But I'd like to include the following statement in mitigation measure AES-1 to provide some type of standard on the treatment of the windows for the buildings that face each of the surrounding streets. And my concern there is based on how the rear of your phase 1 building has been treated and the less than desirable experience for 45th Street. There's not much there other than your utility function, and I realize you needed to place it somewhere, but I think one of the ways to improve on that is to set some minimum standards for windows and openings, and you've clearly achieved that in your phase 2 building. The language that I would like inserted under the first bullet to mitigation measure AES-1 on page 2 is the following. It reads, the proposed structures shall adequately reinforce and be visually compatible with surrounding historic brick buildings, and insert after that statement, and walls adjacent to surrounding streets shall contain a minimum of 20% window/openings in the total wall area. Now, your phase 2 building probably has at least 40% of openings or windows on those facades. What I'm trying to do is make sure that Pixar provides windows during each of the phases, or with the parking garage openings that you're going to have for circulation purposes. But as my main concern is the Hollis building and how that's going to be resolved. I think it's an easily achievable standard, and I'm hoping the commission understands why I like that there and supports that.
So, but you made no mention about utilities.
I'm not sure, given that so far in the future, how they're going to resolve it. If you look at the tentative map, they have some driveways and some other improvements on the north side of the Hollis building. One of the big problems with the north side of the phase 1 building, if you go up 45th Street, is that it's a blank wall. It's a continuous blank wall. And I just like to make sure that every one of those walls, whether they consolidate them or spread them out, that we've got windows and openings on those walls that face the streets.
I'd support that.
I'd support that.
Well, there are already 3 votes there, right?
Right?
No.
Okay.
I don't agree with it either. I just think that they've had just really superb architects on this project, and I can just not visualize. And somebody along the way is going to be doing some design review of the buildings, right? The council?
Well,
We will.
You and the council, because the FDPs will be coming to you in the
Okay,
future.
so I don't know why we need to add that as a condition if we're not approving the looks of the building right now.
my intention is to give some direction to where the future solutions will go, and to set some standards around how to address concerns.
I just hate to give somebody standards. I think we ought to leave the creativity of the architects up to the architects and not up to us. I prefer to just see what they want to do, and then if I don't like it, I will tell them so. But I prefer to leave the choice up to them.
I do too, but we have the Michaels store as testament to.
But let's not compare that.
Okay, well, no, obviously not. I mean, Pixar is
Right.
I mean, it's just amazing. But I don't think this is onerous, because I think it's going to be exceeded. I think Pixar will exceed that requirement. I mean, that's my opinion anyway. I think it's a good direction.
Chair Martin, excuse me?
Yes.
To the extent the Commission is confident that the mitigation measures are adequate to mitigate the impacts that were indicated, I think that some of these issues that you are trying to address, you can easily do so in the context of modifying conditions of approval. And it would be your staff's recommendation that you try and address those items there. Your revision to your to AES1, I think, could easily be addressed by adding similar language to conditions 7A1, which are design conditions, and I think that would be a good place to put those.
Good.
Thank you, Mike.
So does that mean we vote?
And I know you had some other issues on mitigation measures, and we can certainly find appropriate places for those modifications if you so choose as a commission.
The last step the commission staff and Pixar has in front of them, and that's some suggested language change to the preliminary development plan. And I'm going to walk you through overhead, so hopefully people understand my points.
Commissioner Martin, while you're doing that, I'd just like to point out that I believe the language that you're suggesting is a modification to the narrative that describes the preliminary development plan, which was something that was submitted to us by Pixar.
It's titled Preliminary Development Plan. It was not dated, and there wasn't a source. So those are the changes that I made. If it was a submittal directly from Pixar, that's fine.
Yeah, it goes with the drawings that they submitted.
Okay. Is there a problem with that in attempting to incorporate those changes technically, or do they need to be incorporated? Well, let's walk through the changes, see how the commission responds.
Isn't this a council decision? Isn't this outside of our purview of what we're doing here tonight?
Well, what I'm looking at are the design issues.
Council.
Right. And some of these are with regard to the Phase 1 building. Others are with regard to the design of the overall complex. And I do believe it's our responsibility to look critically, just as we've heard comments tonight on the CEQA document. I think it's one of our responsibilities to look critically at the design and whether it successfully addresses the concerns that the commission raised a year ago. And so what I just want to do is walk through those concerns and make some suggestions for how they can, I think for the most part, be easily addressed. I had asked Tom about the parking structure. And that is going to sit flush with the bike trail on the east side of the complex. I think there's been a concern about the security and providing a fence around the entire development to maintain that security. But as an example, in the future parking structure phase, they won't be providing a fence on the east side of that structure. And what I'd like to do, given that there obviously is a solution to taking down the fence on part of that frontage, and the possibility that we could have the community center to the north of that parking structure on 45th Street, I see another opportunity to taking down that fence on the 45th Street frontage from the northeast corner to the point where the garage ends near the access to 45th Street. That would provide an improvement to that experience, to everybody using the 45th Street corridor, to those using the bike path, and possibly everybody using the community center across the street. If you look at the tentative map carefully, and if you look at the preliminary plans and the parcel map, Pixar's already provided at least a 15-foot setback from the right-of-way along 45th Street. And so the first requests there. I'm actually in the handout that I gave you under Phase 3, I suggested inserting some language that addressed some of these design issues. In the first paragraph, I talk about how we can improve that frontage north of the parking garage by taking that fence down along the frontage when the garage goes up, and then closing the fence at the northwest corner of the parking garage. I also call for the minimum 15-foot standard, which they've already exceeded if you look carefully at the tentative map. So in reality, it wouldn't adjust the footprint of the parking structure when it's eventually built. What I'm trying to do is get the fence down wherever we can. And just as they have on the east side of the building, it seems like a simple solution to get that fence down on the north side of the parking structure, which is what I've outlined there in the changes to the first paragraph. And I'm curious how the rest of the commission feels about that suggestion.
Well, I guess the question is, why had they not already thought about that, since they were not having the fence on the eastern side where the park is?
I think
the building itself is the fence.
Right, and I think they were trying to maximize the parking area in the parking structure and use the bike path and the landscaping along the bike path as a screening opportunity on the east side of the building. So by not providing a setback, you don't need the fence, and you can use the grates on the lower level of parking structure and eliminate the fence that will border the sidewalk and separate the sidewalk from that structure. What I'm trying to do is improve the pedestrian experience around the perimeter of the building, and it seems like a simple solution to achieving that.
Ask them what they think.
Yeah. Tom, do you have any thoughts on
You
that?
guys still awake?
Well, I'd rather respond to it all when I have.
Okay. Well, I'm not enthused. Sorry. I mean, I like the idea, but last-minute changes is really tough for me.
Well, in my mind, this is our opportunity to look at it and look at it critically. And I understand staff has been working hard, and Pixar has been working with staff and trying to resolve issues that have been raised. But that is one of the issues that staff has expressed.
Yeah, the problem I have with that is that, with the fence issue, and it's coming up again, what we talked about this at length, about the fence, and then there was the 7-foot Hollis Street, or
7.5-foot frontage.
With the trees and everything else, and really a serious attempt, number one. Number two, I think the massing of the buildings against the fence really create a nice contrast, personally. And number three, they have a right for security. I mean, they have a lot of value in both plant and intellectual property that they have to deal with. So, I'm really loath to force the hand on any of this. I would imagine that if they can, I'd like to see this, but I really, it'd be hard for me to put this in a condition.
And and we went through this before we approved their project on the first go-around. I mean, about the security fence. It just went on and on and on and on, and we finally realized that they needed to have the security by having the fence, and we finally gave up on that. And I just don't think that we should revisit it now just because they are building some more buildings. I mean, either they're having a fence or they're not having a fence. So I think we ought to just leave it. The other issue with your, the gateway corner, which
At Hollis and Park.
issue.
yeah, which is we all have a gateway of choice, which is something we had asked them about, and they had looked at it, and they are not able to do it because of all the equipment that's on that corner. But instead of that, they are giving us the entire strip all the way down Hollis to 45th Street. A little mini park all the way down, which is a lot more than just having something on the corner, I think. And I thought that was a great compromise on their behalf to do that. And so I think that we ought to let that corner go too. Maybe we can put a statue of you on there.
Not me.
Not you?
Public art. We'll do
Nora,
public art.
yeah, do a piece of public art.
We're reaching the...
I just think we're done, yes, yeah.
Almost. So, Chris, you raised the last
The corner issue, yes.
point of issue, and that is the Hollis Street frontage. And I realize that perhaps the commission looked at this issue when you first approved the Pixar application. I wasn't part of the commission then, and I've heard lots of very loud criticism about the fence and the separation. And what I'm trying to do is address that a little bit. I'm not suggesting that Pixar take the fence down for security purposes. What I'm trying to do is get these buildings to literally touch the sidewalk a little bit, so there's a sense as you move around the building and the complex that it does have an impression of accessibility. And I think that can be achieved with some minimum windows and where we can take the fence down to provide that as well. And that goes to the Phase 2 improvements. And rather than make them as recommendations to the council, what I was hoping to do was actually get them into the PDP. And that's the first paragraph there. What I'm suggesting, if you look at the Hollis Street frontage, and again, I'm trying to respect the issue of security, but I see a very simple solution. If you look at the Hollis Street frontage and the elevation difference between the sidewalk here on Hollis and the first set of windows in the program space, we've got at least 10 feet, if not 15 feet in some spaces. I do not believe these will be operable windows, so there's no potential for anything coming out or going into those windows. There's no potential for anyone using this space to peer into the windows. And it just seems as a simple solution to take that fence down along that frontage. And if it's possible, when the Hollis building goes in, do the same thing up at that corner. There was a great photo montage that vaguely gives us a sense of what that fence is going to do. This is looking south on Hollis at 45th Street, and this is what's called the Hollis building. There's an interruption in the frontage for anybody moving down that sidewalk, and we've got that space between the building, the separation with the windows, and all that landscape potential that you don't feel when you go down there. We're losing all those access points at Semi-Freddy's, Bisco. We're losing the last draw to this part of Hollis Street in pedestrian activity. And in my mind, one way to address that loss is to try to get that fence out of there. And I'm not sure whether it's completely feasible because we don't know where the elevation grades are going to go in the Phase 3 building, and that's why I've worded the language the way I did, if it is in fact feasible for the Phase 3 or Phase 4 building at Hollis, at the Hollis building. But it's clearly achievable at this frontage to the Phase 2 building. If you look carefully at the tentative map, there are actually exits. One of the things we requested was some ground floor activity and use at that corner, and we requested that they look very carefully at the relationship of this building to City Hall, the most important building in my mind in Emeryville. And instead of developing a visual relationship to City Hall and an attempt at symmetry, what they did is, and I think respectfully, decided not to mimic that relationship and leave it very subtle. But my last suggestion, in addition to taking the fence down as sort of a phased approach, is to providing some type of accessible use on the ground level. They've got a basement there. I've specified a minimum 1,000 square feet for PR community use. I think it could be easily accommodated, maybe some windows that are consistent with this vertical pattern. 1,000 square feet would be, let's say, 20 feet back from the corner of the building and 50 feet from the edge. I know a lot of people that want to get into Pixar and find out about Pixar, and they're not members of the chamber. They may be less engaged in the school community than a lot of us, but they want to get in there. They want to find out about you, and your current facility doesn't allow that. And I realize the security concerns you have. What I've suggested in my language is that this be a completely separate space, so there's no potential for compromise of that security, and allow it to become a multi-use function there. People who want to get into Pixar and find out, I now see people taking photographs in front of your entrance sign. And I think people will go there and they will use the space.
And do
if
what?
If it's an opportunity to find out about Pixar, they will visit it. I deliberately left the suggested use open because I think there are a lot of things that could go in there that could complement what happens at City Hall. Pixar has a lot of great artists. When I've visited the mezzanine there, they've got great art there. It could be a very simple gallery space. My hope is that we just get some physical pedestrian activity at that corner. If we're not going to emphasize it, my hope is that we don't completely lose the pedestrian activity along Hollis and access opportunities into the complex.
I like the ideas, but there's no way I could support it as being any kind of requirement. Tom?
I'd like to speak. Jim, I'm respectful of your opinions, but this is one case where I can't agree to this. I don't set the security policy at Pixar. Pixar is very concerned. We've always been concerned about our security, and when we came to Emeryville, it was a condition of us moving to Emeryville to have our fence. And I think I have adequately demonstrated all the times I've been up here why we need it and what it's for. And I know that I have a lot of support in this community for our fence now. Maybe people don't like it, but they understand it now. I've invited people to come into inside our fence and look at it from our point of view. And since 9/11, people do understand why we need it. I can't have somebody drive up with a bomb right up next to our building, and I cannot accept this. Pixar will never agree to this. So I'm sorry. We have worked with Charlie. We've given you guys a lot of things on this plan. The setback on Hollis Street is going to be really nice. The linear park, the bike path is going to be great. We're going to build beautiful buildings. This is above and beyond anything that I can accept. And I just urge you to please vote on this now. Vote on what we've already agreed on, what I've already shown you here today, because this is just not something that's acceptable, Jim.
I do have a question about the parking structure. I understand your response to the Hollis Street frontage and the major changes that I've suggested for the Phase 2 building, and for the potential for the Hollis building as well. Your eventual parking garage design has a great system with no fence on the east side of that building, with unbollard access to the Long's Drugs building. Are you less concerned about the parking structure? Why haven't you provided that continuous security fencing around that structure?
Well, we could put that fence in. Right now, we're showing the maximum size garage that we would think we need to build. But if that garage needed to be smaller and we wanted to set it back, we still could put the fence there. But in order to provide what we think is the right amount of parking and to give the city that extra 20 feet that we originally weren't going to give, we had to make sure that on our plan we showed the maximum size garage that we're capable of building. That's why it's showing it on the lot line. It wasn't necessarily our choice to not put the fence there. But that's the way we have to present it, because we don't know in the end if that's how big the garage will be. But I can't agree to take the fence down on 45th Street. I don't know what that's going to be on that edge. And I don't think it's fair to ask us to take down our fence even along that stretch.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, I'm ready
That was
to
a good
make
try.
a motion.
No, I'd actually like some assistance from Charlie to get through. We have 2 resolutions here, and I'd like to know whether we need to make separate
Yes.
motions for each
Yeah.
of
Yes,
the...
you do. Yes, we would like you to make one motion, or take one vote on the mitigated negative declaration, and then vote on the, your recommendations to council on the various project approvals. And at that point, on that second resolution, we would like to kind of summarize some modifications to the conditions.
Please.
That staff is recommending. I think Charlie can summarize, well, actually, you should
We could do
summarize
that
them
right now if you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, can we
Let's
do...
let's
can we
do the negative
Can we do the...
declaration.
Well, I think you should know what the modifications are to
I'd
the
like to know
conditional
what
use
they are.
before you do the
Go ahead, Carol.
neg deck. So Charlie will go ahead and summarize.
Okay, this is basically from late-breaking correspondence from Pixar. Let me see. Page 4, condition number Roman numeral 2A2,
Are these in the conditions of approval or the mitigated neg deck?
conditions of approval.
Okay.
The public art program, we would stipulate that this applies to phases 3 and 4 because the requirement has already been met for phase 2. On page 11, under public improvements, Roman numeral, it's late, IV, is that 4 or 6? 4, thank you. Okay, 4A2, little a, street improvements required for phase 2 construction shall include. We would like to modify A to say installation or modification as appropriate of curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and landscaping along the south side of 45th Street. That's because that curb is already there, but it will need to be modified to provide a curb cut for the bike path and some landscaping that is not there now along the planter strip next to the street. So that's just a little bit of clarification. And right below that, little c, we would delete that and substitute in language, which we haven't written yet, but language to the effect that Pixar will instead give us a $50,000 in lieu fee to be used for pedestrian safety instead of all these bulb outs along Park Avenue.
Is that, can I clarify, does mitigation measure trans 4 stay? There's a reference to that.
Yes, the mitigation
Okay.
measure stays.
This relates to the additional bulb outs
Well,
on
I think
Emery, Harlan,
I
and
sense that there
Haven.
was an agreement with the commission that we eliminate for this phase anyway the bulb out on the south side of Park. I thought we all agreed that that made sense. Mitigation measure. Not that it's going to change the significance level, but it just in terms of design and the querying issue and problem, I thought there was agreement that it made sense.
That's not the recommendation of your staff at this stage to significantly modify a mitigation measure at this point.
Well, the question is whether it's significant. And in my mind, there are 2 issues. One is querying, and the problem with querying, how to resolve and address that. The other is pedestrian safety. We're providing a stop sign at each of those corners.
Well, then there will be findings that the lead agency, in this case it's the council, but we would then also recommend that that you provide a recommendation that if you're going to do that as a body, that in essence this revised mitigation measure is essentially an enhancement
Correct.
to the existing, and then I forget the other, there's a second finding.
It's that it will not cause a significant effect.
Okay.
If I may interject for a moment I thought it came out on the record, but perhaps it wasn't clear. In terms of the queuing problem, from that there was concern raised. The bulb out are not going to go out any further than the parking currently does. So to the extent that existing parking creates a queuing problem, the bulb out will not contribute to that at all. They're not going to be designed past the current parking lines. So to the extent that there's a queuing issue, I think it's only at special events that it's been occasional, and we have the mitigation where they can go on the 45th Street side, but the bulb out is not expected to create any additional impacts because it's not really going to create a better pedestrian environment, but it's not really going to alter vehicular traffic at all on Park.
Is that fine with Pixar? Okay. Well, the mitigation measures do call, if there's a problem, it has to be resolved somehow. And in my mind, it was just a simple solution of addressing the analysis in the initial study. The initial study clearly pointed out that there was a potential for a querying problem on the left turn northbound movement for eastbound traffic. And it was specifically stated that it was because of the bulb out at that intersection that there'd no longer be an opportunity to move around those left turn vehicles waiting to turn into Pixar.
But I believe, is Rob still here?
Yes.
Rob can obviously speak for himself, but I thought he was suggesting that you can design it in a manner that you retain the bulb out, but it still can be designed in a fashion that allows cars to pass in the event there is queuing. And that can be refined in the actual design of the bulb out without removing it.
Why is there a mitigation that says that there's a problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could clarify this, that would be useful.
Yeah, I never saw anything that said that.
Not right
Excuse me, Jim, could you clarify where, I'm wondering if this was in response to comments? It's in the
Pardon?
traffic?
We're having trouble locating where it says that the bulb outs would cause a queuing problem.
In the transportation discussion. Maybe Rob knows off the top of his head. I know
In the mitigated neg deck itself, or in the...
in the mitigated neg deck.
Oh.
We couldn't locate it.
It's on page 89. In the middle of page 89.
Oh, there it is.
If you look in the 4th paragraph, it says vehicle queries have been observed on Park Avenue as vehicles wait to turn left into the Pixar campus. These queries occur as right-turning vehicles into Pixar. The Pixar site has the right-of-way over left-turning traffic. Through traffic on Park Avenue currently may bypass the vehicle queries as there is sufficient roadway width to allow this maneuver. With the installation of extensions at this intersection, insufficient roadway width would remain to allow this maneuver. In my mind, it's just a very simple solution, and I'm not sure why this I thought the commission went through this and it made sense. And we even suggested specific language changes that could be made in the condition of approval rather than...
You were confused in terms of what you were presenting there.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Were we confused in terms of what you were presenting? Because it looked like it was the bulb out that was the issue there.
You're interpreting the text correctly. What I tried to say earlier when I was speaking here previously is that there are different ways to design the bulb outs. You can design them to come out beyond the parking and narrow down the lanes. You can design them to be aligned with the parking so the lanes are not narrowed. You can design them with very small turning radii, so it's very difficult to make a right turn. You can design them with a larger radii, so it's easier to make a right turn. And what I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but it was my intent to bring some different examples of how you might construct bulb outs there to to have these different characteristics. So you could see what would happen if there was a situation where you had congestion and the vehicle could not bypass a delay.
I guess we'd
another
just like
delayed
to know,
vehicle.
is there a way to design a bulb out that still allows for the eastbound querying?
Yes, there is a way to design a bulb out so that the vehicle that is waiting to turn left, another vehicle can pass on the right and continue through.
And you
One issue that I just want to make clear is that we're proposing an all-way stop, however, so there is no reason to have a bypass lane because no vehicles would be delayed.
Well, it depends on the delay in the querying
I mean, if
into
you
the
have-
left turn
If
movement.
you have 5 people turning to the left, I mean,
And you want that single car to go through, then yes, it would be good to have 2 lanes
Yeah.
there. Park Avenue is wide enough to be able to have multiple lanes and still have bulb outs. And so that's what I was proposing, was to bring different concepts. I guess maybe one solution here is that you can provide direction that you want the bulb outs to be designed such that cars can bypass another vehicle.
That's what we were trying to accomplish.
You get
And
that?
I mean, that
Let's move on.
seems fair.
yeah.
The mitigation measure refers to a concept that's illustrated in Figure 15 in the MND. I just want to make sure whether the mitigation measure changes, whether the condition of approval changes, that we just don't have the querying problem. And if you can design that and the mitigation measure can stand as is, I don't have a problem with it.
Can be designed.
Well,
Right.
good.
Maybe you can add some language to the conditions.
That'd be a good spot.
With the section on the bulb outs, we could,
Okay, well, maybe in that same condition or that series of conditions on street improvements, we will include that the bulb outs will be designed to allow passing
Right.
of
Or
cars.
just say that they won't extend beyond the parked car, about that distance.
Okay.
With the radii of a large pizza pie, so it can make an easy right turn.
Right. Okay.
I don't think any pizza places are open anymore.
And I wish that bar was open.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, moving right along. Next modification, and I
what did we
think
talk about?
the last one. No? Right? Yes. Page 19, Roman numeral 7A1, elevations, colors, materials, site plan. To the end of the first sentence, we would add to ensure consistency with the approved FDP of the relevant phase. Just to clarify that that's what we're looking at. That's understood, but Pixar would like it made explicit. Right?
It's fine.
Now, I
Don't
also
trust
have, excuse me?
No, just,
I also have a note on this page about the 20% window openings on the street elevations. That was something that you had wanted to add, I think.
yes.
There were 3 of us that were supportive of the change.
Were there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
3, not 4.
I understand. I know the difference between 3 and 2. Yeah. Well,
I believe those are the changes that we would like to recommend.
and then if I may clarify, I think that the only change that I understand to the mitigation measures is with, based on the changes being made to the conditions of approval, is that mitigation measure trans 9, you wanted the language added except as provided for in trans 8. And I think that's simply a clarification
Yes.
of the existing measures, and I don't believe that requires any additional findings.
And then in trans 11, the reference to requiring parking spaces, or adequate parking spaces at each phase in that the construction phasing and management plan. I think there was an agreement there that made sense.
The conditions of approval.
Well,
In the last bullet,
Well, during
Again, I think there are some conditions of approval where you can address that concern It does speak to it as
Beginning?
well.
Of Trans 11?
Yes. It talks about the construction phase and management plan for each project phase, which means we would have to demonstrate that for each phase.
So that
Yeah,
you
because
always
it-
have the required parking, no matter
it-
what you're constructing?
Phase of construction.
Okay.
No, the point that was raised in one of the comment letters was with regard to required parking, and that was the only insert that I had made there, is that you're going to achieve your required parking for each phase, which isn't specified in the actual mitigation measure.
Well, it is included, I know you have to kind of read in several different places here to put this together, but it is included in the conditions of approval, page 18, Roman numeral 6A, parking, and it simply lists the minimum number of spaces that must be provided in each phase.
And that's in the conditions? Okay.
Yes.
That's fine.
Are we done?
Are we done?
So,
Charlie, are we done now?
did you have anything else to add, Carol?
No, I don't have anything else to add. Right? We're okay? Okay.
So we have two resolutions before us. We need to make motions and vote on each resolution, is that correct?
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's
I
correct.
move that we recommend to the city, that the city council adopt the mitigated negative declaration for the Pixar headquarters expansion project.
Second.
Ready to vote?
Ready.
Commissioner Jeffrey,
Aye.
Commissioner Kane,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutz,
Aye.
Commissioner Owens.
Aye.
Vice Chair Martin.
Aye.
5 ayes, the motion is approved.
Move the other one?
No, I'll let you do it.
You want to move it
No, you do it.
again? You're just so nice to this old woman, I swear I like it. Okay. I move the resolution of the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council that it approve the general plan amendments, an amendment to the Emeryville bicycle and pedestrian plan, an amendment of the preliminary development plan, rezoning the 4240 Hollis Street property, and an amendment to the building heights map, an amended and restated development agreement, and an amended and restated participation agreement, vacation of the Emery Street right-of-way between 45th and Park, and a tentative subdivision map, all relating to the Pixar headquarters expansion project.
I second.
On the motion, Commissioner Jeffrey,
Aye.
Commissioner Kane,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutz,
Aye.
Commissioner Owens,
Aye.
Vice Chair Martin.
I'm actually going to vote no. I raised specific concerns that I don't believe have been addressed sufficiently in my mind, including design issues. I really support Pixar. I think you guys are an important part of our community. I know my vote doesn't influence the decision here of the commission, but I'd at least like the council to hopefully have attention to some of the issues that I raised when they consider this. But I want to thank you for all the work you've done and the cooperation you've shown with staff.
Vice Chair Martin, before we adjourn, I'd like to make an announcement. The public hearing on this item at the City Council is scheduled for May 18th, and I hope there's still somebody left who's watching this on TV, or certainly when it's rebroadcast, this will be heard. The notice of intent to adopt a mitigated negative declaration mistakenly said that the council hearing would be May 4th. That is not correct. The council hearing will be on May 18th.
Thank you, Charlie. Commissioner comments at 1:07 a.m.
God,
Any comments?
I wish that pub were open now.
Seeing none, we'll close the commission meeting.
Adjourned.
Claudine.
This was one of the longest.